If you have ever thought to yourself, I know exactly what I need to do, I know how I want to react, I know where these patterns are coming from, so why do I keep repeating them? You tell yourself that this time you will respond differently. This time you will speak up in a meeting. This time you won't pull away from someone who genuinely cares about you. This time you will not overthink that text message. This time you will stop people pleasing. And then the moment finally arrives, you freeze, or you stay silent, or you react exactly the way you have reacted 100 times before. And afterwards, you're sitting there thinking, I understood this, I worked on this, I know why I am like this, so why am I still here? If you have ever had those thoughts, keep listening. Hi, I'm Meg Chabra, and this is Things We Never Say, a podcast about the conversations we avoid, the emotional patterns we repeat, and the things we all feel but rarely say out loud. Today, I want to talk about one of the biggest misconceptions I think we have about personal growth. We assume that understanding ourselves should automatically change us. That once we know why we behave the way we do, the behavior should disappear. But that's not what happens. You can understand yourself completely and still find yourself repeating the exact same patterns. I want to talk about why that happens, what self awareness actually is, why insight alone is not enough, and what really change actually looks like. Before we understand why awareness is not enough, I think we first have to ask another question. Are we even as self aware as we think we are? Most of us would probably say yes. I definitely would have. If someone had asked me a few years ago whether I knew myself well, I would have said absolutely. I know my patterns, I know my strengths, I know my flaws, I know why I react the way I do. But then I came across a piece of research that completely changed how I thought about self awareness. Around 90% of people believe they are self aware. But do you know how much actually are, according to research? Only around 10 to 15. When I first read that, I genuinely thought, how is that even possible? How can almost everyone think they're self aware if so few people actually are? The answer was surprising. It's because we have confused thinking about ourselves with knowing ourselves. Tasha Eurich talks about this beautifully in one of her TED Talks. She explains that introspection and self awareness are not the same thing. Now, don't get me wrong, reflection is valuable. Thinking about your experiences matters. Journaling and therapy help. Trying to understand yourself is very important, but reflection is not automatically accurate. Sometimes it simply becomes rumination. And one of the biggest reasons for that is the kind of questions we are asking ourselves. Think about how often we ask ourselves why. Why do I keep falling for emotionally unavailable people? Why didn't I get promoted? Why can't I speak in public? Why did I react like that? Why can't I just change? It feels productive. It feels like you are uncovering some deep truth about yourself. But a lot of the time, we are not really uncovering anything. We are inventing explanations. Now you might be thinking, no, the answers I give myself are definitely true. I used to think that too. But let me tell you about one of my favorite psychology experiments. Researchers showed participants two photographs and asked them to choose the person they found more attractive. They made their choice. A little while later, the researchers came back and handed them the photograph they supposedly chose. Except it was not the photograph they had chosen. It was the other one. Then they asked them, tell us why you chose this person. Only around 20 to 26% of participants noticed that they had been given the wrong photograph. Everyone else confidently explained why they had chosen it. Someone who originally preferred one photograph because the woman wasn't wearing earrings would suddenly say, I actually like the earrings on this person. They were not lying. Their brains were simply trying to make sense of what they believed had happened. Our brains don't like gaps in the story. When we don't know why we did something, they often create an explanation that feels true. Not because we are dishonest. It's only because our brains want the situations to be coherent. I'll give you another example. A friend of mine went dancing one night. The next morning, she woke up with pain all over her body. She remembered the night perfectly, or at least she thought she did. She assumed that she was sore because she had spent hours dancing. A day later, she spoke to the people she had gone out with. They told her, "You know, you fell twice." She had completely forgotten. Her brain had simply filled in a perfectly reasonable explanation. That's what our minds do. They hate uncertainty. They would often rather create a convincing story than admit, "I don't actually know." So, if constantly asking why can sometimes lead us further away from ourselves, what should we ask instead? That's the answer. Ask what. Instead of asking why do I get anxious, ask what about this situation makes me anxious. Instead of saying why can't I speak up, ask what happens inside me just before I stop myself. Instead of why do I keep choosing emotionally unavailable people, ask what makes someone feel emotionally safe or unsafe to me. These questions keep us grounded in what we are actually experiencing instead of the stories we are creating about ourselves. And once we start asking better questions, we become genuinely more self aware. But here is the interesting part. Let's imagine you have done all of that. You have reflected, you have understood your patterns, you have probably spent years trying to figure yourself out. You are asking what instead of why. And even then, there are moments when you're standing in the exact situation you prepared yourself for, and you still do the thing you promised yourself you wouldn't. You tell yourself you'll speak up in the meeting, you rehearse the sentence in your head, and you keep saying, "Just say it, just say it, just say it." The discussion moves on. Someone else says exactly what you wanted to say. Everyone nods, everyone agrees, and you are left wondering, "I knew what I wanted to say. So why couldn't I just say it?" Or maybe it's about a relationship. You know you have a tendency to pull away from people when they get too close. You have understood where it comes from. You have journaled about it, you have talked about in therapy, you have promised yourself you will stay this time. Then someone starts getting emotionally close, and before you even realize what's happening, you have already started distancing yourself. It is one of the strangest experiences. Your mind understood everything, but your body did not get the memo. So, why does that happen? To understand that, I want to go back to something that happens long before any of us can remember. Long before we could explain our feelings, not long before we could think rationally. Because the emotional part of our brain starts learning about the world much earlier than the thinking part. As babies, we don't understand the world through language. We understand it through experience, through someone's tone of voice, through facial expressions, touch, rhythm, whether someone comes when we cry, whether our emotional needs are being met consistently. Our nervous system is constantly asking just one question: am I safe? Every one of those experiences become information. Not information that we consciously remember right now, but information that our nervous system definitely does. By the time we are old enough to explain our emotions, our nervous system already has a language. It has spent years learning what safety feels like. It's already learning things like, is the world predictable? Can I trust other people? Is it okay to ask for help? Is it safe to express my emotions, or do I need to hide them? And that's where attachment comes in. When psychologists talk about secure attachment, they're not talking about parents being perfect. No one is. They're talking about a child repeatedly having the experience that their emotions are met. That when they are distressed, someone helps regulate them. That when they're overwhelmed, someone stays with them. Over time, something remarkable happens. That regulation that was external becomes internal. The child does not need someone else to calm them anymore. Their nervous system learns how to do it itself. They develop the ability to tolerate difficult emotions, to recover after stressful situations, to feel safe even when life is not perfect. But what happens when that process is interrupted? Maybe there was some inconsistency. Maybe there was emotional unavailability. Maybe there was neglect, trauma. Maybe the people around the child were dealing with things they could not cope with themselves. Don't get to choose the environment they grow up in. The only thing they can do is adapt to it. If home feels unpredictable, becoming hyper vigilant makes a lot of sense. If expressing emotions has led to rejection, learning to hide them, fair. If love feels inconsistent, staying emotionally distant might become the safest option. These are not flaws, these are adaptations. In fact, they were probably incredibly intelligent adaptations at the time. They helped you survive. The problem is that our nervous system doesn't automatically realize that the environment has changed. So, years later, you might be in a healthy relationship, you might be surrounded by safe people, you might consciously know that opening up is okay, but your nervous system learned something different a long time ago. And that's why anxiety, emotional numbness, chronic self criticism, fear of closeness, feeling constantly on edge often are not signs that you're weak or irrational. They are signs that your nervous system is still using strategies that once helped you survive. That's why simply understanding the pattern doesn't always make it disappear. Because the pattern wasn't originally learned through logic, it was learned through repeated emotional experiences. And what is learned through repeated experience is rarely undone by a single insight. That's the gap so many of us find ourselves living in. We understand our patterns, we understand where they're coming from, and yet, when life happens, we still repeat them. So, if understanding is not enough, what actually happens inside the brain in those moments? Why does it feel like your body takes over before your mind has a chance to respond? Let's talk about that. So, now we know where these patterns come from, but we are still left with the same question. If I understand all of this, if I've spent years working on myself, if I know exactly what I should do, why do I still find myself doing the opposite? The answer has to do with the fact that your brain doesn't have just one job. Part of your brain helps you think, it helps you reflect, plan, solve, imagine the future, and decide the kind of person you want to become. This is where insight lives, this is where self awareness lives. This is the part of you that's listening to this podcast thinking, that makes sense. But there is another part of your brain, a much older part. A part that is not trying to understand your life. It's trying to keep you alive. It learns through repetition, through experience, through emotion. And unlike your thinking brain, it does not stop to ask, what's the healthiest thing to do here? Instead, it asks, have I ever been in a situation like this before? What helped me survive last time? And then it repeats that response. Because your brain loves predictability. Predictability takes less energy, it is fast, it is familiar. Imagine you have spent years believing that speaking up would lead to embarrassment. Maybe nobody actually told you that. Maybe you just slowly learned it. And now you're sitting in a meeting, you know the answer, you know your idea is valuable. You even tell yourself, just say it. Come on, just say it. But while your thinking brain is trying to convince you, your nervous system has already made its decision. It says, we have been here before, speaking up does not feel safe, let's just stay quiet. And by the time the meeting ends, someone else had already said exactly what you wanted to say, and you walk away frustrated. Not because you did not know what to do, but because your body responded before your thoughts had a chance to catch up. The same thing happens in relationships. Maybe someone starts getting close. Your conscious mind says, this is different, this person feels safe. But your nervous system remembers something much older. It remembers that vulnerability once led to pain. So it reaches for the strategy it has practiced the most. It pulls away. Not because it wants to sabotage your relationship, because it thinks it's protecting you. And I think that's one of the hardest things to accept. It can feel like your body is betraying you, but it is not. Your nervous system is not trying to ruin your life. It's trying to protect you by using a strategy it learned years ago. The problem is that what once protected you may now be keeping you stuck. This is also why understanding ourselves can sometimes become so frustrating. We assume that because we have had the insight, the behavior should disappear. But insight and behavior don't live in the same place. Insight can happen in a single conversation, a single therapy session, a single book, a single podcast, but capacity develops much more slowly. It develops through repeated experiences, through practice, through showing your nervous system over and over again that something different is also safe. And there is something else that's really important to understand. Your nervous system prioritizes short term regulation over long term psychological goals. Think about what happens when you avoid a difficult conversation. Does it solve the problem? Probably not. But it does reduce your anxiety in the moment, at least for tonight. Think about reassurance seeking. Every time you ask someone, "Are you sure everything is okay?" you feel better for a little while. Or even perfectionism. You spend hours trying to make something perfect because uncertainty feels unbearable. In every one of those situations, your nervous system is not choosing what will make your life better next year. It is choosing what helps you feel safer in the next 10 minutes. Very different goals. That's why avoiding vulnerability feels easier than risking rejection. That's why staying silent feels easier than speaking up. People pleasing feels easier than disappointing someone. Your nervous system chooses immediate relief. It's not weak, it is not lazy, and it's not because you don't want to change. It's because immediate relief has worked before. For some people, this gap between knowing and doing can feel even bigger. If you're living with chronic stress, trauma, if you have ADHD, or struggling with anxiety or depression, putting insight into action can become even harder. Wanting to change and having the mental capacity to change are not always the same things. That doesn't mean that change is impossible. It only means that we have to stop measuring ourselves by insight alone. Because insight was never meant to do the whole job. So, if understanding is not enough, if awareness is not enough, what actually creates lasting change? That's what we are going to talk about next. Now, you know something that I think a lot of us are never taught. You know that understanding yourself and changing yourself are not the same skill. You know that your nervous system is trying to protect you. You know that these patterns did not appear overnight, and that they are probably not going to disappear overnight either. So, the obvious question becomes, what do I actually do? The first thing that I want you to understand is that your nervous system learned these patterns through repetition, which means it also unlearns them through repetition, not through one moment of insight, not through one book or one episode of a podcast, through repeated exercises, experiences that slowly teach your brain maybe this situation is not as dangerous as I thought it was. Let's go back to the example of speaking in a group. You're sitting there, your heart is racing. You're rehearsing the sentence over and over in your head. You're telling yourself, "Speak, speak, please just speak up. It's not that hard. Please, please, please speak up." What usually happens is that we wait until the fear disappears before we say something. But that's almost never how it works. The fear is not going to disappear first. The action has to come first. So maybe instead of waiting until you are completely comfortable, you say one sentence. Just one. No need to sound brilliant, no need to try and impress anyone, and please try to not replay it in your head afterwards. Simply contribute once. That's it. The goal is not to become confident overnight. The goal is to give your nervous system one new experience. One experience where you spoke and nothing terrible happened. Then you do it again and again and again. Eventually, your brain starts updating its prediction patterns. It slowly realizes maybe speaking is not as dangerous as I believed. That's how change happens. Not because your mind finally found the perfect explanation, but because your body has had enough experiences to believe something new. Another thing that helps is practicing self-awareness in real time. Not afterwards, not 3 hours later while replaying the conversation in your head. In the moment, the next time that you notice yourself freezing, pause there. Instead of asking, why am I like this? Ask, what about this particular moment feels unsafe? That one question can change a lot of things for you. It shifts your attention away from judging yourself and towards understanding what your nervous system is trying to protect you from. Then remind yourself of something that is very important. This is not who I am. This is just my nervous system and the things that it has practiced. One is your identity, the other is a learned response. And learned responses can change. Something else that you can do is decide what you're going to do before you're in the situation. Your brain loves automatic reactions. It wants to work without doing any work actually. Shortcuts is what it needs. So don't wait until you are anxious to figure out how you will respond. Decide beforehand. 2 hours before the meeting, 2 days before the meeting, know exactly how you will react in the situation. So when you are in a meeting, you don't become anxious in that moment. You don't have to give your brain a moment to decide what you need to do. Before that, you have already told yourself, if someone asks for my opinion, I am going to share one thought. Maybe you are going into a difficult conversation and you can decide beforehand, if I feel the urge to shut down, I am going to stay for 5 more minutes before walking away. You are giving your brain another path to take, a response it can become familiar with. Because eventually the new response starts becoming the familiar one. And that is really what we are trying to do here. We are not trying to eliminate fear. We are trying to teach our nervous system that fear does not always mean danger. That is one of the biggest misunderstandings we have. We assume that if something feels uncomfortable, it must be wrong. If our gut is telling us that this is not feeling right, it is wrong. But discomfort and danger are not the same thing. Speaking honestly is uncomfortable, setting boundaries is uncomfortable, being vulnerable, asking for help, trying something new, all of these are uncomfortable experiences. That discomfort doesn't necessarily mean you're making the wrong choice. It just simply means you're doing something your nervous system has not practiced yet. And every single time you choose the new response, you're teaching your brain something. You are saying, this situation did not destroy me. I can survive this too. That is how your nervous system changes. Not through one big breakthrough, but through hundreds of ordinary moments where you respond a little differently than you did before. So if you have been asking yourself, I understand myself enough, why am I still here? Maybe the answer is not that you haven't understood yourself. Maybe your understanding arrived much faster than your nervous system could change. Insight can happen in a single afternoon. Capacity is built in hundreds of movements afterwards. Insight tells you where the pattern comes from. Practice teaches your nervous system that it doesn't need the pattern anymore. That's why awareness matters. It really does. It's where change begins. It was just never meant to do the whole job. And if you've listened to this episode and found yourself thinking, this is exactly what's happening to me, I want you to know that understanding the pattern is often just the beginning. Changing it is a completely different set. It's difficult to do alone because we are often too close to our patterns to see them clearly. We can understand them intellectually and still struggle to respond differently when we are actually in the moment. That is why I created Unpack with Mehak. These are not sessions where I tell you what to do or give you a list of techniques. They are conversations where we slow things down together. Understand the patterns you are living with, identify what your nervous system has learned to protect you from, and work towards building new ways of responding that actually feel possible. You don't need more information, you need a space where information becomes transformation. That's the work we are going to do together. If that sounds like something you're looking for, you can find all the details through the link in the description. I would genuinely love to work with you. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Things We Never Say. If this episode resonated with you, I would really appreciate it if you share it with someone who keeps wondering why they know exactly what to do but still find themselves repeating the same patterns. Thank you for spending this time with me. I will see you in the next episode.